A homeless Navy SEAL bought a forgotten mansion for pennies. Then his dog uncovered a secret powerful men tried to bury. Ryan Mercer thought he was buying a ruined property nobody wanted. Deep in Montana's Bitterroot Mountains stood a decaying mansion surrounded by 11 abandoned vehicles, 2 silent airplanes, and decades of unanswered questions. But when his retired military German shepherd refused to stop digging on a lonely hillside, they uncovered something hidden beneath the earth, something that would expose a forgotten American hero, awaken dangerous enemies, and change both their lives forever. Comment 1 if you believe loyalty can change a life, or 0 if you've ever had someone stand by you through your hardest days, and tell us where you're watching from. The cold arrived early that evening. By sunset, the parking lot behind the truck stop outside Hamilton, Montana, had already begun to freeze. Thin sheets of ice formed along the edges of puddles. Wind swept across the open asphalt, carrying the smell of diesel fuel, snow, and distant pine forests from the Bitterroot Mountains. An aging blue pickup sat alone near the far fence. Its paint was faded. Rust spotted the wheel wells. One headlight was held in place with silver tape. Inside, former Navy SEAL Ryan Mercer pulled his jacket tighter around his chest. The truck's heater had stopped working months ago. A sleeping bag covered his legs. Beside him, a large German shepherd lifted his head and quietly watched the darkness outside. The dog's name was Ranger. At 11 years old, gray fur had begun creeping around his muzzle. His movements were slower than they used to be, but his eyes remained sharp. Always watching, always listening, always protecting. Ryan reached over and scratched behind the dog's ears. "Another luxury suite tonight, partner." Ranger's tail tapped once against the seat. Ryan smiled faintly. The smile disappeared quickly. The truth was harder to laugh about these days. 5 years earlier, Ryan had owned a small house outside Billings. He had a business repairing boats and outdoor equipment. He had enough money to pay his bills, enough to sleep without worrying where he'd wake up. Then life had started taking pieces. The nightmares came first, then panic attacks, then the sleepless nights. After years of military service and multiple deployments overseas, the things Ryan thought he'd buried had slowly clawed their way back to the surface. At first he ignored them. Then he hid them. Then they controlled him. Work became difficult. Customers stopped calling. Medical appointments piled up. Insurance covered some things. Not enough. Debt followed. Eventually the house disappeared. The business disappeared. Almost everything disappeared. Everything except Ranger. Ryan looked out through the windshield. Truck headlights rolled past on the highway beyond the parking lot. People going somewhere. People returning home. People who belonged somewhere. He wondered what that felt like now. The thought lingered longer than he wanted. A sudden gust rattled the truck. Ranger immediately lifted his head. Alert. Ready. Ryan shook his head. False alarm. The dog continued staring into the darkness for several seconds before finally settling down again. That was Ranger. Even retired, he never truly stopped working. Years earlier, they had served together overseas. Ryan still remembered the first time he saw him. A young military working dog. All ears, all energy, all confidence. The trainers had warned everyone. That dog works harder than you do. They had been right. Over the years, Ranger had detected explosives, tracked missing people, and saved lives more times than Ryan could count, including Ryan's. Especially Ryan's. The nightmares arrived after midnight. They always did. One moment Ryan was asleep. The next he was somewhere else entirely. Dust, heat, radio chatter, a helicopter overhead, men shouting. Then silence. The terrible kind. The kind that came after something had gone wrong. Ryan jerked awake. His breathing was fast. His hands were clenched into fists. For a few terrifying seconds, he didn't know where he was. Then something warm pressed against his arm. Ranger. The German shepherd had already climbed halfway across the seat. His nose rested against Ryan's shoulder. Steady. Present. Real. Ryan closed his eyes. Slowly, the panic began to fade. The truck returned. The parking lot returned. Montana returned. The nightmare slipped away. "Good boy," he whispered. Ranger remained beside him until his breathing normalized. Only then did the dog return to his position near the passenger window. Guard duty resumed. Ryan glanced at the clock. 2:43 a.m. Sleep wasn't coming back. It rarely did. He pulled his jacket tighter and stared through the windshield. Snow had begun falling. Tiny white flakes drifted beneath the parking lot lights. For a moment, the world looked peaceful, almost beautiful. The illusion lasted less than a minute. A truck engine roared somewhere nearby. Reality returned. Morning arrived gray and cold. Ryan woke to sunlight filtering through clouds. The inside of the windshield was covered with condensation. Ranger was already awake. The dog sat upright, watching the parking lot. A habit he never lost. Ryan stretched and winced. His back hurt. His neck hurt. His shoulders hurt. Sleeping in a truck did that. Outside, people hurried in and out of the truck stop carrying coffee and breakfast sandwiches. Ryan grabbed the last bottle of water from the floorboard. Breakfast. Water and determination. Again. He opened the door. Cold air hit him immediately. Ranger jumped down beside him. Together they walked toward the truck stop. Employees knew them by now. A few nodded. One waitress always left scraps of bacon for Ranger. The dog had become something of a local celebrity. Inside, warmth wrapped around them. Coffee machines hummed. Country music played softly overhead. Ryan bought the cheapest coffee available and sat near the window. Ranger settled beside the booth. A waitress approached. Her name tag read, Karen. "You two surviving out there?" Ryan smiled. "Barely." She placed 2 strips of bacon on a napkin near Ranger. The dog's ears perked immediately. Karen laughed. "At least somebody's having a good morning." A few minutes later, Ryan opened an old laptop. The screen flickered twice before coming to life. He checked job listings. Nothing. Checked veteran assistance programs. Nothing new. Then he opened county auction notices, mostly habit, something to do while finishing coffee. Most listings were exactly what he expected. Tax liens, abandoned trailers, vacant lots, nothing useful. Then one listing caught his attention. Ryan leaned closer. A property photo appeared. A massive stone mansion, surrounded by mountains. The description was surprisingly short. Abandoned estate, Bitterroot region, as-is condition. All structures included. Ryan frowned. He clicked. More photos loaded. The mansion, an enormous field, several outbuildings. Then another image, a vehicle. Then another, an airplane. Ryan blinked. What the hell? The next image showed another airplane. The next showed multiple vehicles, rows of them, abandoned, forgotten. Strange. His pulse quickened slightly. He continued reading. Years of legal complications. No interested buyers. Auction scheduled for the following day. Minimum bid astonishingly low, far lower than it should have been. Ryan stared at the screen. Something about the property felt impossible, almost unreal. A mansion, vehicles, aircraft, hundreds of acres, practically being given away. Common sense told him there was a reason nobody wanted it. A big reason. A dangerous reason. But another feeling pushed back. Hope. Small. Fragile. Dangerous. Hope. For the first time in months, Ryan felt something stir inside him. A possibility. He looked down at Ranger. The German shepherd had finished the bacon and was staring directly at him. Waiting. Trusting. As always. Ryan turned the laptop around. "You want to see something crazy?" Ranger tilted his head. Ryan laughed softly. The sound surprised him. He hadn't laughed much lately. Outside the window, snow continued falling. Beyond the town, beyond the highway, beyond the truck stop, the Bitterroot Mountains stood beneath a blanket of white clouds. Waiting. Ryan stared at the auction listing one more time. Then he looked at the balance in his bank account. It wasn't much. In fact, it was nearly everything he had left. Enough to survive a little longer. Or enough to gamble. For several seconds, he sat completely still. Then he closed the laptop. Decision made. "Looks like we're moving, partner." Ranger stood immediately, tail wagging once, as if he already knew. Ryan looked toward the distant mountains through the restaurant window. He had no idea that the abandoned estate would change everything. He didn't know about the mansion, the airplanes, the 11 vehicles, the hidden hill, the forgotten legend, or the secret waiting beneath the snow. All he knew was that for the first time in a very long time, he had somewhere to go. And sometimes, hope begins exactly that way, with one desperate decision. The next morning, Ryan Mercer pointed his aging pickup truck south and left Hamilton behind. Snow dusted the roads. The mountains ahead rose beneath a blanket of gray clouds. Ranger sat upright in the passenger seat, watching the highway roll beneath them. The German shepherd seemed unusually alert, more alert than usual. Ryan noticed it twice during the drive. Every time they passed into more isolated country, Ranger's ears lifted. His nose twitched. His eyes scanned the landscape beyond the windshield, as if he sensed they were heading somewhere important, or somewhere dangerous. Ryan wasn't sure which. The auction paperwork sat folded on the dashboard. The entire purchase still felt unreal. After taxes, fees, and every dollar he had left, the property now belonged to him. At least on paper. Whether that was a blessing or a disaster remained to be seen. The further they traveled into the Bitterroot Mountains, the fewer people they saw. Gas stations disappeared. Cell service weakened. Small ranches became scattered across valleys surrounded by endless forests. Snow-covered peaks towered above everything. By midday, Ryan turned onto an unmarked gravel road. The truck bounced violently over frozen ruts. Pine trees crowded both sides. The road wound through dense wilderness for nearly 20 minutes. Then something appeared ahead. An iron gate. Ryan slowed immediately. The gate stood nearly 10 feet high. Rust covered most of its surface. One side hung slightly crooked. The stone pillars supporting it were cracked with age. A faded metal sign remained attached. The lettering had nearly disappeared, but one word remained visible. Bennett. Ryan frowned. The name meant nothing to him. Not yet. He shifted the truck into park. Silence settled around them. No traffic. No people. No distant machinery. Only wind moving through the trees. Ranger stared through the windshield, completely focused. Ryan stepped out. Cold mountain air struck immediately. The silence felt different here. Not peaceful, not threatening, just old, as if this place had been forgotten for a very long time. He pushed the gate. The hinges screamed in protest. Metal groaned. The sound echoed through the trees, then faded. Ryan climbed back into the truck. The drive beyond the gate stretched almost half a mile. Overgrown weeds pushed through gravel. Small saplings had begun growing near the edges. Nature was slowly reclaiming everything. Then the trees opened. Ryan froze. For several seconds, he simply stared. The mansion stood at the center of the valley like something from another century. Massive stone walls, towering windows, 2 stories, a wide front porch, a roofline stretching across the landscape. Time had damaged it. Broken windows, missing shingles, vines climbing sections of the walls. Yet despite the decay, the building still carried a strange dignity, like an old soldier standing at attention long after everyone else had left. Ryan slowly removed his hands from the steering wheel. Well, he exhaled. I definitely didn't buy a trailer. Ranger pushed his nose against the glass. The dog seemed far more interested in something else. Ryan followed his gaze. The field surrounding the mansion, and what sat inside it. Vehicles. Lots of vehicles. Not 1, not 2. 11. Scattered across the property. Some sat near outbuildings. Others rested in tall grass. One old pickup leaned at an angle where its tires had collapsed decades ago. A military jeep stood near a weathered barn. An ambulance-style truck rested beneath a row of trees. Everything looked abandoned, frozen in time, exactly like the auction photos. Except seeing them in person felt different, much different. The vehicles weren't junk. They felt like evidence. Evidence of a story nobody had finished telling. Ryan stepped from the truck. The crunch of snow echoed beneath his boots. Then he saw the airplanes. Both sat beyond the mansion near the far end of the valley. Twin-engine aircraft. Weathered but intact. Their wings stretched across the field like giant sleeping birds. One appeared damaged. The other looked surprisingly complete. Ryan blinked, then laughed. The sound surprised him. I own airplanes now. Ranger ignored him completely. The dog had jumped from the truck. Instead of exploring the mansion, he stood perfectly still, watching something. Ryan looked around. What is it? Ranger didn't move. His eyes remained fixed beyond the mansion, toward a distant hillside rising behind the property, a simple hill, covered in snow. Nothing unusual, at least nothing Ryan could see. Eventually, the dog turned away. Ryan shrugged. Probably deer. Or rabbits. The mountains were full of wildlife. He grabbed his backpack and began walking toward the mansion. The front porch creaked beneath his weight. The massive front door stood slightly open. Cold air drifted from inside. Ryan pushed gently. The door moved with surprising ease. Dust floated through shafts of sunlight. A huge foyer stretched before him. Stone floors, a sweeping staircase, massive rooms extending in every direction. Furniture remained scattered throughout the house, covered by white sheets. Waiting. The place looked less abandoned than expected. Not maintained, but preserved, as though someone had simply walked away. Ryan moved slowly. Old habits. Clear rooms. Check corners. Observe exits. Years in the SEAL teams had permanently changed how he entered unfamiliar spaces. The mansion felt empty, yet not lifeless. That feeling lingered. Room after room revealed more clues. Old photographs, bookshelves, maps, tools, the remains of a life once lived here. By late afternoon, Ryan stood near a second-floor window overlooking the valley. The view was breathtaking. Mountains surrounded the property in every direction. The mansion sat completely isolated, miles from anything, miles from anyone. For the first time in years, he felt something unexpected. Peace. Real peace. Not happiness. Not yet. But peace. Then Ranger barked. Once. Sharp. Urgent. Ryan immediately turned. The dog stood downstairs near a broken rear window, staring toward the hill again. The exact same hill. His body had gone rigid. Ears forward. Tail still. Focused. Ryan walked beside him. What do you see? Nothing moved. No animals. No people. No vehicles. Only snow and trees. Yet Ranger refused to look away. The dog remained frozen for nearly a full minute. Finally, he released a low growl. Not aggressive, not loud. Just enough. The sound raised the hairs on Ryan's neck. Years of working beside military dogs had taught him something important. Dogs noticed things humans missed, especially Ranger, especially when he became this focused. Ryan continued studying the hillside. Still nothing. Eventually, the dog stepped back. The moment passed, but the feeling remained. Something about that hill bothered him. He just didn't know why. As sunset approached, Ryan carried supplies from the truck into the mansion. A sleeping bag, food, water, flashlights, tools, everything he owned. The list wasn't very long anymore. Night arrived quickly in the mountains. Darkness settled across the valley. The temperature dropped fast. Ryan lit a lantern inside the main room. Golden light pushed back the shadows. Barely. Outside, wind moved through the trees. The mansion occasionally creaked and groaned. Old wood, old stone, old memories, normal sounds. At least that's what Ryan told himself. Ranger settled near a rear window, watching, always watching. Hours passed. Ryan ate canned soup warmed over a camping stove. The meal wasn't good, but it was hot. That counted. For a while, he simply sat and listened. No traffic, no sirens, no crowded parking lot. Nothing. The silence felt almost unbelievable. Then headlights appeared. Ryan stood immediately. Every muscle tightened. The lights moved slowly up the driveway. A truck, older model, local, not threatening. Still, he watched carefully. The vehicle stopped near the mansion. An older man climbed out. Gray beard, heavy coat, weathered face, the look of someone who had spent his entire life outdoors. Ryan stepped onto the porch. The stranger approached, stopping several yards away. Ryan Mercer? Ryan nodded. That's me. The man extended a hand. Wade Holloway. Ryan shook it. The rancher's grip felt solid, confident. My property borders the north side of this valley. Ryan glanced toward the darkness. Closest neighbor I've got? Wade smiled faintly. Closest one you'll have. Neither spoke for a moment. Wind moved across the field. The airplanes stood silent beneath moonlight. Finally, Wade looked toward the mansion. Never thought I'd see someone living here again. Ryan folded his arms. Why's that? The older man's expression changed slightly. Something unreadable crossed his face. Memory. Concern. Maybe both. People stopped trying a long time ago. Ryan waited. Wade continued staring toward the house, then toward the distant hill behind it. The same hill Ranger had watched all day. If I were you, Wade said quietly, I'd pay attention to that dog. Ryan looked back at Ranger. The German shepherd stood beside the window. Watching. Still watching. The hill. Again. Ryan turned back. What do you mean? But Wade only shook his head. You'll figure it out. The answer wasn't satisfying. The rancher climbed back into his truck, then paused, one hand resting on the door. There are a lot of stories about this place. Ryan raised an eyebrow. What kind of stories? Wade stared toward the darkness, then finally answered. The kind nobody agrees on. Moments later, his truck disappeared down the driveway, leaving Ryan alone again. The valley fell silent. Moonlight covered the mansion, covered the airplanes, covered the 11 abandoned vehicles, and beyond all of it, the snow-covered hill waited quietly in the darkness. Ranger remained at the window, eyes fixed on the same spot. Ryan followed his gaze one final time before heading toward his sleeping bag. The hill looked ordinary, completely ordinary. Yet somehow he knew. The German Shepherd wasn't staring at it by accident, and whatever had captured Ranger's attention had been waiting there a very long time, waiting for someone to finally notice, waiting beneath the snow, waiting beneath the silence, waiting for them. Ryan Mercer slept lightly that night. Years in the SEAL teams had trained him to rest without ever fully surrendering awareness. Every creak of the mansion registered somewhere in the back of his mind. Every gust of wind rattling an old window became part of a mental map of sounds. The mansion groaned occasionally, wood expanding, stone settling, old age speaking through the darkness. Most of it felt normal. One sound did not. A metallic clang echoed somewhere outside shortly after midnight. Ryan's eyes opened instantly. His body reacted before his thoughts caught up. Heart rate elevated, breathing controlled, listening. The room disappeared for half a second. Not the mansion, not Montana. Another place, another night, another mission. Then Ranger's low growl pulled him back. The German Shepherd stood near the broken rear window, alert, focused, watching. Ryan sat up slowly. The lantern had burned low. Moonlight spilled through shattered glass. Outside, the valley appeared silver beneath fresh snow. "What is it, partner?" he whispered. Ranger never looked away. The dog remained locked on the same direction. The hill. Again. Ryan moved beside him. Nothing. No lights. No movement. No vehicles. Only snow-covered slopes beneath moonlight. After several minutes, the feeling faded. Eventually, Ranger relaxed. Slightly. Ryan returned to his sleeping bag. Sleep did not. By sunrise, he had made a decision. The property needed a full survey. Not because he was curious, because he was responsible for it now, and because something about the place felt unfinished. The morning arrived cold and clear. Golden sunlight spilled across the valley. For the first time, Ryan truly saw the scale of the estate. The property stretched far beyond what he had imagined. Dense forests, rolling meadows, rock outcroppings, small streams cutting through frozen ground. The mountains surrounded everything like silent guardians. Beautiful, remote, isolated. Perfect terrain for someone who wanted privacy or secrecy. Ryan carried an old notebook from the truck. Years ago, he would have called it building an operational picture. Now it was simply documenting what belonged to him, or what supposedly belonged to him. Ranger accompanied him everywhere, never more than a few steps away. The dog moved confidently through the snow, sniffing, observing, checking, working. Old habits never disappeared. The first destination was the nearest abandoned vehicle, the military jeep. Up close, it looked older than he initially thought. Vietnam era, perhaps, possibly earlier. The tires had long since collapsed, rust-covered sections of the frame. Yet something immediately caught Ryan's attention. The identification plates. Gone. Every single one. He crouched beside the vehicle. The mounting points remained visible. The metal around them showed signs of deliberate removal. Not weather, not decay. Someone had intentionally stripped the identifying information. Years ago or recently, impossible to tell. Ryan ran a finger along the scarred metal. A strange feeling settled in his stomach. People erased serial numbers. Machines did not. Ranger sniffed around the Jeep, then abruptly lost interest. The dog turned and began walking away, toward the hill. Again. Ryan laughed quietly. "You're obsessed." The German Shepherd didn't even look back. The second stop was the barn. The structure sat nearly 300 yards from the mansion. Weathered red paint peeled from its walls. The roof sagged slightly. Snow drifted against one side. Ryan paused at the entrance. The large door stood partially open. He was almost certain it had been closed yesterday. Almost. His memory replayed the scene. Arrival. Unloading supplies. Walking the property. He remembered noticing the barn. He remembered thinking the doors looked shut. Now one stood open. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe not. The uncertainty bothered him. Ryan entered carefully. Dust floated through shafts of sunlight. The smell of old wood mixed with oil and rust. Tools remained hanging on walls. Workbenches stood exactly where someone had left them. The place felt abandoned, yet strangely preserved, as though people had expected to return, and never did. Then Ryan saw the footprints. Fresh. Not fresh, but recent. A disturbance in the dust near the rear wall. Boot prints. Human. Definitely human. His pulse quickened. The impressions were partial. Several days old, perhaps. Possibly a week, hard to tell. But they existed. Someone had entered this barn, long after it was supposed to have been abandoned. Ryan followed them. The trail led toward a storage area, then vanished among older marks. Nothing stolen, nothing broken, nothing obvious. Still, the discovery changed something. Wade Holloway's warning suddenly felt more serious. People stopped trying a long time ago. Ryan stood quietly for several seconds, listening. The barn remained silent. Outside, Ranger barked once, sharp, urgent. Ryan immediately headed toward the sound. The German Shepherd stood near the far edge of the property, close to the airplanes. His ears stood forward, his eyes fixed on the distant hillside. Again. Always the hill. Ryan approached slowly. "Come on." Ranger ignored him. The dog remained frozen, focused, watching. Finally, Ryan followed his gaze. The hillside looked ordinary. Snow, trees, brush, nothing else. Yet for reasons he couldn't explain, the back of his neck tightened. The same instinct that had kept him alive overseas whispered quietly, "Pay attention." The feeling passed quickly, but not completely. Ryan spent the afternoon inspecting the airplanes. The first aircraft appeared heavily weathered. One propeller bent, several windows cracked. Paint faded almost entirely away. The second plane looked different, better maintained, or at least less damaged. Snow covered its wings, sunlight reflected from the aluminum skin. Ryan climbed carefully onto one wing. The metal creaked beneath his boots. Inside the cockpit, dust coated every surface. Flight controls, seats, instruments. Everything remained untouched, frozen in time. Then he noticed something tucked beside the pilot's seat. A photograph. Ryan carefully picked it up. The image had faded with age. A man stood smiling beside the airplane. Tall, broad-shouldered, weathered face, confident eyes. Behind him stood the mansion. Behind the mansion stood the same mountains, the same valley, the same property. The back of the photograph contained writing. Ryan turned it over. The ink had faded but remained legible. Samuel Bennett. June 1979. Ryan frowned. The name immediately stood out. Samuel Bennett. The name on the gate. The original owner. Perhaps. The mystery suddenly felt more personal. A real person. Not just an abandoned estate. Someone had built this place. Someone had flown these aircraft. Someone had left 11 vehicles scattered across the property. And someone had vanished. Ryan slipped the photograph into his jacket pocket. The discovery felt important. He wasn't sure why. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, Ranger disappeared. For nearly 15 minutes. The longest the dog had wandered since arriving. Ryan eventually found him halfway up the hillside, standing in deep snow, motionless, watching the ground. Not the forest, not the valley. The ground. Ryan climbed toward him. "What are you doing up here?" Ranger began sniffing intensely, circling, returning to the same area repeatedly, then scratching, not playfully, deliberately. The dog pawed at the snow, stopped, sniffed again, scratched again. Ryan watched carefully. The behavior felt different, purposeful, focused, almost investigative. After several moments, Ranger stopped and looked directly at him, then looked at the ground, then back at Ryan. The message felt strangely clear. "Look here." Ryan stepped closer. Nothing appeared unusual, just snow-covered earth. Still, he marked the location mentally. Something about Ranger's behavior felt too specific to ignore. Eventually, the dog moved on. The sun drifted lower behind the mountains. Long shadows stretched across the valley. The temperature dropped rapidly. By the time they returned to the mansion, darkness had begun swallowing the landscape. Ryan stood on the front porch. The valley glowed beneath the final light of day. The airplanes rested silently in the distance. The abandoned vehicles cast long shadows across the snow. And beyond them all sat the hillside. Quiet, ordinary, yet somehow impossible to forget. He reached into his jacket and removed the photograph. Samuel Bennett smiled back at him. A man frozen in another time. A man connected to this place. A man whose story had somehow ended here. Ryan stared at the image for several seconds. Then at the hill. Then at Ranger. The German shepherd sat beside him, watching the same slope once again. Not moving. Not blinking. Just watching. And for the first time since arriving at the estate, Ryan began wondering if Ranger wasn't simply interested in the hill. Maybe he was trying to tell him something. Something hidden. Something forgotten. Something waiting beneath the snow. And somewhere deep inside the old soldier, curiosity began replacing caution. Because now there were too many questions. The footprints. The missing serial numbers. The photograph. The warnings, and the hill that refused to let go. Whatever secret the property was hiding, Ryan had a feeling he was getting closer, and someone else might already know it was there. The thought followed him into sleep. It lingered through dreams he couldn't fully remember, and it remained there when morning arrived over the Bitterroot Mountains. Sunlight spilled across the valley in pale gold ribbons. Snow sparkled on the rooftops of the mansion. The abandoned airplanes cast long shadows across the frozen field. Everything looked peaceful, yet Ryan woke with the same feeling he carried into bed. Questions. Too many questions. The photograph of Samuel Bennett sat on the old dining room table. Ryan stared at it while drinking coffee heated on a camping stove. The pilot's smile seemed strangely familiar. Not because Ryan recognized him, because he recognized the type. the look of someone carrying responsibility, someone people depended on, someone who believed purpose mattered more than comfort. Ryan had known men like that. Some had come home, some hadn't. Ranger sat nearby. The German shepherd had already finished breakfast. Instead of relaxing, he stood near the broken rear window, watching the hill. Again, always the hill. Ryan followed his gaze. Nothing moved. No people, no vehicles, no animals. The hillside remained quiet beneath fresh snow, yet Ranger refused to stop checking it. Ryan finally stood. "All right." The dog immediately looked at him. "We need answers." Ranger's tail moved once. The nearest place to find them wasn't the mansion. It was town. An hour later, Ryan guided the truck down the mountain road. The mansion disappeared behind him. The valley vanished beneath the trees. Eventually, civilization returned. Small ranches, mailboxes, pickup trucks, power lines. Then Alder Creek appeared. The town sat beneath a backdrop of snow-covered mountains. Small, old. The kind of place where everybody noticed newcomers. A single main street stretched through the center. A diner, a hardware store, a gas station, a church, a feed supply business, and a library. Ryan parked near the diner first. The bell above the entrance jingled as he stepped inside. Conversations softened briefly. Not stopped, just softened. Small towns always noticed strangers, especially strangers accompanied by large German shepherds. Ranger stayed close. Several customers smiled at him immediately. One elderly rancher raised his coffee cup. "Good-looking dog." Ryan nodded. "Best partner I've ever had." The rancher laughed. "That's usually how it works." A waitress guided Ryan toward a booth. The smell of bacon and coffee filled the room. For the first time in days, Ryan felt surrounded by people again. The sensation felt strange, not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. He ordered breakfast and listened. Listening had always been one of his strengths. People talked when they felt comfortable. And in small towns, people talked a lot, especially when they thought nobody was paying attention. Eventually, he heard it. The mansion. Not directly. Indirectly. The old Bennett place. A mention from one table. Then another. The Valley property. Then silence. Every conversation ended the same way. The moment someone brought up the estate, voices lowered, topics changed, people glanced around, as though discussing it made them uneasy. Ryan finished breakfast and paid the bill. One mystery solved. The town knew the property. The town remembered it. The town simply didn't want to talk about it. The library stood 2 blocks away. A brick building with white columns and tall windows. It looked older than most of the town itself. The scent of paper greeted him the moment he entered. Ranger padded quietly beside him. Behind the front desk sat an elderly woman. Silver hair, thin glasses, kind eyes. She looked up as the door opened, then immediately noticed Ranger. A smile appeared. "Well now." The dog walked directly toward her. His tail wagged once. The woman laughed softly. "I think we just became friends." Ryan smiled. "He tends to choose good people." The woman extended a hand. "My name is Eleanor Pierce, Ryan Mercer." Her expression changed slightly. Recognition. Not of Ryan, of the name, the new owner. Ryan nodded. "News travels fast." Eleanor smiled. "Not much escapes Alder Creek." Her eyes drifted briefly toward the mountains outside, especially things connected to that property. Ryan reached into his jacket. The photograph emerged. The moment Eleanor saw it, she froze, completely froze. For several seconds she didn't move. didn't speak, didn't blink. The library seemed unusually quiet. Finally, she removed her glasses. "Where did you find this?" "One of the airplanes." Eleanor slowly sat down. Her eyes remained fixed on the image. Samuel Bennett. The name sounded different when she said it. Not like history, like memory, like someone she had known. Ryan pulled out a chair. Who was he? Eleanor remained silent for a moment. Outside, snow drifted past the windows. A truck rolled slowly down Main Street. The library felt separated from time, almost sacred. Finally, she answered. "When I was a little girl, everybody in western Montana knew Samuel Bennett." Ryan listened carefully, the same way he had listened during briefings years ago. Gather information, build the picture. Was he wealthy? Eleanor shook her head. No. Famous? Again, she shook her head. Not really. She touched the edge of the photograph gently. But if a storm trapped your family in the mountains, you prayed Samuel Bennett would find you. Ryan frowned. The answer surprised him. Eleanor stood and disappeared into a back room. Several minutes passed. When she returned, she carried an old archive box. Dust covered the lid. Carefully, she placed it on the table. Inside were newspaper clippings, photographs, old reports, articles yellowed with age. Ryan picked up the first clipping. The headline read, "Local pilot rescues lost hikers during blizzard," another article. "Volunteer team delivers medical supplies to isolated community," another. "Mountain search ends with miracle rescue." Every article included the same name. Samuel Bennett. Every photograph showed the same man, the same smile, the same eyes, the same pilot from the airplane. Ryan looked up. He did all this? For decades. Eleanor nodded. He never stopped. The old woman's voice softened. People trusted him. Another clipping showed aircraft landing in deep snow. Another showed families standing beside rescue teams. Children, firefighters, ranchers, pilots, an entire network, a lifetime of service. Ryan felt unexpected respect growing inside him. Samuel wasn't just a property owner. He was something more. What happened to him? The question changed everything. Eleanor's smile vanished. Silence filled the room. A long silence. The kind people carry when discussing old wounds. Finally, she sighed. He disappeared. Ryan blinked. Disappeared? 40 years ago, no wreckage? No. No body? No. The answer hung heavily in the air. Ryan understood immediately. Military families knew that kind of pain. No answers. No closure. Just absence. Eleanor folded her hands. One day he was flying rescue missions. She paused. The next day he was gone. Ryan glanced at the photograph again. A man who spent his life saving others, then vanished. The story didn't feel finished. Not even close. What about his family? Eleanor hesitated. His wife. Ryan waited. Claire Bennett. The name seemed important. Eleanor stared through the window toward the mountains. After Samuel disappeared, she became very private. What happened to her? No one really knows. The answer deepened the mystery. Samuel gone. Claire gone. A mansion abandoned. 11 vehicles left behind. 2 airplanes sitting untouched. Nothing about the story made sense. Then Ryan noticed something. Another photograph near the bottom of the archive box, partially hidden beneath newspaper clippings. He pulled it free. The image showed Samuel standing beside several volunteers. Everyone wore identical jackets. A circular emblem appeared on the shoulder. Faded, almost invisible, but still recognizable. Eleanor immediately leaned forward. Her expression changed. Not surprise. Concern. Real concern. What is it? She stared at the emblem. For several seconds, she didn't answer. Then she whispered 2 words. Summit Watch. Ryan repeated them. Summit Watch. Eleanor looked around the library, as though suddenly worried someone might overhear. Her reaction instantly captured Ryan's attention. What was Summit Watch? The old woman hesitated, long enough to confirm something important. She knew more than she wanted to say. Finally, she answered. Officially? Ryan waited. A volunteer rescue organization. Officially? The word slipped out before he could stop it. Eleanor's eyes met his. The silence told him everything. There was more. Much more. But before she could continue, Ranger suddenly stood. The German shepherd's posture changed instantly. Alert. Focused. Watching. Not the photograph. Not Eleanor. The front windows. Ryan followed his gaze. Outside, a dark SUV rolled slowly down the street. The vehicle passed the library, continued another 20 yards, then stopped. The engine remained running. The windows were tinted. Nobody got out. Nobody came inside. Yet Ranger continued watching, completely still. The SUV sat there for nearly 30 seconds, then drove away. Ryan felt a familiar sensation, the same one he'd felt overseas. The feeling that someone was paying attention. The feeling that someone else already knew the game had started. When he looked back toward Eleanor, her face had gone pale. She had seen the vehicle too. What is Summit Watch? Ryan asked again. This time Eleanor's answer came quietly. So much more than people were ever told. Outside, snow continued falling across Alder Creek. And for the first time since arriving in Montana, Ryan realized he wasn't simply uncovering an old mystery. He was stepping into a story that somebody had spent 40 years trying to bury. The drive back to the mansion felt longer than usual. Snow drifted across the mountain roads. The sky hung low and gray above the Bitterroot range. Ranger sat upright in the passenger seat, watching through the windshield. The German shepherd hadn't relaxed since leaving Alder Creek. Neither had Ryan. Eleanor Pierce's words echoed in his mind. Summit Watch. Officially a volunteer rescue organization. Officially. That single word bothered him. People only used that word when there was another version of the story. A version they weren't ready to tell. By the time the mansion appeared beyond the trees, dusk had begun settling over the valley. The massive stone structure stood against the mountains like a forgotten fortress. The abandoned vehicles remained scattered across the property. The airplanes rested silently beneath fresh snow. Everything looked exactly as it had that morning, except Ryan no longer saw it the same way. Now every object seemed connected to a mystery. Every shadow felt like a clue. The moment the truck stopped, Ranger jumped out. Not toward the mansion, not toward the barn, not toward the airplanes. The hill, again. Ryan watched the dog disappear through the snow. The same path, the same destination, the same obsession. For several seconds he remained seated behind the wheel. Then he sighed. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" Ranger barked once. The answer seemed obvious. That night, Ryan barely slept. Wind rattled the mansion. Old boards creaked. Snow tapped against broken windows. Several times he found himself staring toward the rear of the property, toward the hill, toward whatever had captured Ranger's attention from the first day. Just before dawn, he made a decision. Enough waiting, enough guessing. If the dog believed something was there, Ryan intended to find out what it was. Morning arrived beneath a pale winter sky. Ryan loaded a shovel into the truck, a pry bar, flashlights, water, basic tools. Years of military service had taught him something simple. When investigating the unknown, preparation mattered. Ranger waited beside the truck, tail moving slowly, alert, expectant, almost excited. The hike took 15 minutes. The snow crunched beneath Ryan's boots. Cold air burned in his lungs. The hill overlooked the entire valley. From the top, he could see the mansion, the airplanes, the barn, and the winding road leading toward civilization. A good observation point, the kind of place someone would choose deliberately. Ranger moved ahead, directly toward the same patch of ground. No hesitation, no uncertainty. When he arrived, he immediately began scratching. Snow flew behind him. Ryan stood quietly and watched. The dog circled once, twice, then returned to the exact same location, again and again. The certainty in his behavior was impossible to ignore. Ryan drove the shovel into the ground. The blade cut through snow and frozen dirt. Nothing. Another shovel full. Nothing. He continued digging. 10 minutes. 15. 20. The hole grew deeper. Still nothing. Ryan leaned on the shovel and exhaled. Maybe we've both lost our minds. Ranger ignored him completely. The dog continued pawing at the edge of the excavation. Focused, determined. Ryan resumed digging. The ground suddenly felt different. The shovel struck something. Clang. The metallic sound echoed across the hillside. Both man and dog froze. Ryan's pulse quickened. Slowly he knelt and brushed snow away with gloved hands. A flat surface emerged beneath the dirt. Metal. Not scrap metal. Not debris. Engineered metal. He cleared more soil. The surface expanded. Larger. Wider. The shape became obvious. Rectangular. Perfectly straight edges. Artificial. Very artificial. Ryan sat back. His military instincts immediately activated. Someone had built this. Someone had hidden it. And someone had hidden it extremely well. For decades. Ranger stood beside him, watching every movement. Ryan continued clearing dirt. The outline grew clearer. A steel hatch. Massive. Buried beneath years of snow, vegetation, and time. What in the world? The words disappeared into the wind. Near one corner he found a recessed handle. His heart began beating faster. The same feeling he experienced before opening unknown doors overseas. Curiosity mixed with caution. Ryan grabbed the handle. Pulled. Nothing. The mechanism refused to move. He fetched the pry bar. Worked carefully, patiently. Snow drifted around them. Clouds rolled across the mountains. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour. Then something shifted. A deep metallic groan echoed beneath the earth. The hatch moved, only slightly. But enough. Cold air rushed upward. Ryan immediately stepped back. The air felt different. Not cave air, not mountain air. Still. Preserved. The breath of a place sealed away from the world. Ranger lowered his head and sniffed cautiously. The German shepherd didn't appear frightened, only alert. Ryan widened the opening. Another inch, then another. Darkness waited below. Absolute darkness. He switched on a flashlight. The beam disappeared downward. Concrete walls. A ladder. Depth. Far more depth than expected. The light never reached the bottom. Ryan stared silently. The mountains around him suddenly felt very far away. The mansion felt far away. Everything felt far away. Because beneath the hill sat something impossible, something hidden, something deliberate, something connected to Samuel Bennett, connected to Summit Watch, connected to all the unanswered questions. For several moments, neither Ryan nor Ranger moved. The only sound came from wind crossing the ridge. Then Ryan made a choice. He wasn't climbing down yet. Not today. Unknown spaces demanded preparation. His training insisted on it. He carefully lowered the hatch back into place. The metal settled with a heavy thud. Ranger looked at him, almost disappointed. Ryan laughed softly. I know. The dog tilted his head. I want answers too. Together they started down the hillside. Yet Ryan couldn't stop looking back. The hidden entrance had vanished beneath the snow once more, invisible, almost impossible to find. If Ranger hadn't refused to stop searching, nobody would have discovered it. Maybe not for another 40 years. Maybe never. Back at the mansion, Ryan spent the rest of the afternoon planning. Extra batteries, rope, emergency supplies, better lighting, a notebook. Whatever waited below deserved a careful approach. As evening settled across the valley, he stood on the rear porch, watching darkness spread across the property. The airplanes faded into shadow. The vehicles disappeared one by one. The mountains became black silhouettes against the sky. Ranger sat beside him, calm, satisfied. For the first time since arriving, the dog wasn't staring at the hill. His mission had been accomplished. He had shown Ryan what he wanted him to find. The realization struck unexpectedly. Ranger hadn't been obsessed. He'd been persistent. There was a difference. A very important difference. Ryan looked down at him. Good work, partner. The dog's tail thumped once against the porch. Far away, beyond the darkness, the hidden hatch remained buried beneath the snow. Waiting. Whatever secrets Samuel Bennett had protected for 4 decades were down there. Waiting. And tomorrow, Ryan Mercer intended to find them. Neither man nor dog realized something else. They weren't the only ones interested in what lay beneath that hill. Somewhere beyond the valley, beyond the trees, beyond the darkness gathering around the mountains, someone else had already started paying attention. And the moment the hatch opened, everything was about to change. Ryan Mercer was on the hillside before sunrise. A pale blue glow stretched across the eastern horizon. The mountains remained dark silhouettes against the morning sky. Fresh snow covered the valley. Nothing appeared disturbed. No tracks, no footprints, no signs that anyone else knew what he and Ranger had found. Yet the feeling lingered. The same feeling that had followed him since leaving the library in Alder Creek. The feeling of being watched. Ranger stood beside the hidden hatch. Alert, patient, waiting. Ryan inserted the pry bar and carefully lifted the steel door. The familiar rush of cold, preserved air escaped from below. This time he was ready. Flashlight, extra batteries, notebook, water, rope, everything organized, everything checked twice. Old habits. The beam of his flashlight disappeared into the darkness below. Concrete walls, a metal ladder. Silence. Ryan looked down at Ranger. You coming? The German shepherd stepped forward immediately. Together, they began the descent. The ladder extended nearly 20 feet underground. When Ryan's boots finally touched concrete, he swept the flashlight across the room. Then he froze. The underground facility was far larger than he had imagined. Rows of steel shelves stretched into the darkness. Metal filing cabinets lined the walls. Radio equipment occupied an entire section of the chamber. Maps covered one wall. Storage crates sat neatly stacked. Everything remained organized with military precision. Dust covered most surfaces, yet surprisingly little appeared damaged. The place felt preserved, protected, as though someone had expected it to survive decades underground. Ranger moved cautiously through the room. His nails clicked softly against the concrete floor. Ryan walked forward slowly. The flashlight beam revealed labels, flight logs, weather records, emergency communications, maintenance reports, photographs, thousands of pages, thousands of stories. The deeper he explored, the clearer it became. This wasn't simply a storage room. It was an operations center, a command post, a headquarters, and someone had invested enormous effort into hiding it. Ryan stopped before a massive wall map. Colored markers covered the western United States, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, Washington, Oregon. Handwritten notes surrounded hundreds of locations, search missions, medical evacuations, supply deliveries, storm responses, rescue operations. Again and again, every marker represented people helped, people saved, people found. Samuel Bennett had not been operating alone. He had built something much larger than Ryan initially imagined. Hours passed. Ryan barely noticed. One folder led to another. One map led to another. Photographs filled entire cabinets. Mountain rescues, flood evacuations, families standing beside aircraft, children wrapped in blankets, volunteers smiling beside trucks and helicopters. The scale was astonishing. Then Ryan found a photograph that stopped him cold. A younger Samuel Bennett stood beside a woman. Dark hair, confident smile, intelligent eyes. The back contained a handwritten note. Samuel and Claire Bennett, Summit Watch Headquarters, 1982. Ryan stared at the image. Claire, the wife Eleanor had mentioned. The woman who vanished from public life after Samuel disappeared. For several moments, Ryan simply stood there, looking at two people who had clearly dedicated their lives to helping others. Two people almost forgotten by history. Ranger suddenly barked, once. Sharp. Ryan turned immediately. The German shepherd stood near the far side of the room, beside a row of filing cabinets. His ears were forward, listening. Ryan listened too. Nothing. Complete silence. Still, the dog remained focused. After a moment, the tension faded. Perhaps Ranger had heard something outside. Perhaps nothing. Either way, Ryan made a mental note. Always trust the dog. By early afternoon, he reluctantly climbed back to the surface. The valley greeted him with bright sunlight reflecting off fresh snow. For a few moments, he simply stood there, breathing mountain air, trying to process everything. The hidden facility had answered some questions and created 100 new ones. Samuel Bennett wasn't merely a pilot. Summit Watch wasn't merely a volunteer group. The operation had been enormous, sophisticated, professional, and somehow nobody seemed to know the full story. Or if they did, they weren't talking. Ryan and Ranger returned to the mansion. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly, until the SUV arrived. The vehicle appeared shortly after 3 o'clock. Black, expensive, spotless, completely out of place in the snowy valley. Ryan noticed it immediately. So did Ranger. The German shepherd stood from his resting place near the porch. His posture changed. Alert, focused. The SUV rolled slowly across the property and stopped near the front steps. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Mid-50s, tailored coat, polished boots, perfectly groomed hair. The kind of person who looked more comfortable in a corporate boardroom than standing in a mountain valley. He smiled, not warmly, professionally. "Mr. Mercer?" Ryan remained where he was. "Depends who's asking." The man laughed politely. "My name is Preston Hale." The name meant nothing at first. Then Ryan remembered. Hale. The same name Eleanor had mentioned when discussing local influence. The same name that seemed familiar from conversations in town. Preston extended a business card. Ryan accepted it. Hale Resource Development, Chief Executive Officer. Interesting. Preston glanced around the property. The mansion, the vehicles, the airplanes. Calculating, evaluating, measuring. Ryan recognized the look immediately. The man wasn't admiring the estate. He was assessing value. "I understand you recently acquired the property." Ryan nodded. "That's right. A remarkable purchase." Preston smiled. Ryan said nothing. Silence often encouraged people to reveal more. Preston eventually continued. "My company owns significant holdings throughout western Montana." Still nothing from Ryan. "We're interested in acquiring this property from you." There it was. Direct, simple. Ryan folded the business card and slipped it into his pocket. "Not interested." Preston blinked. "I haven't mentioned a price." "You don't need to." The executive laughed again. Less naturally this time. "Mr. Mercer, I believe you'll find our offer extremely generous. No." The smile faded slightly. Preston studied him, perhaps trying to understand why a homeless veteran would refuse easy money. Ryan understood the confusion. Months earlier, he probably would have accepted. But things were different now. The property wasn't simply land anymore. It was a mystery, a responsibility, a story. And he wasn't ready to walk away. Preston's eyes drifted across the valley, then stopped. On the hill, the exact hill hiding the underground facility. Ryan noticed immediately. So did Ranger. The dog released a low growl, barely audible. Preston looked away quickly. Too quickly. Interesting. Very interesting. "Perhaps you'll reconsider." Ryan shook his head. "I won't." For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Preston smiled once more. The polished corporate smile returned. "If you change your mind, call me." He handed over another card. Moments later, the SUV disappeared down the driveway. Ryan watched until it vanished beyond the gate. Only then did he look toward Ranger. The dog remained focused on the road, watching, thinking, the same way he had watched the SUV arrive. Ryan slowly turned toward the hill. The hidden hatch remained invisible beneath the snow. Yet somehow, Preston Hale had looked directly at it. Not the mansion, not the airplanes, not the vehicles, the hill. That bothered Ryan. A lot. The next morning, he installed 2 trail cameras. One covered the driveway. The second overlooked the hillside. Years of military experience had taught him something simple. Observation comes before action. If someone was interested in the property, Ryan wanted evidence. The cameras remained untouched that day. And the next. Everything seemed normal. Then on the third morning, Ranger started barking before Ryan even stepped outside. The driveway camera remained exactly where it belonged. The hillside camera did not. Ryan found it hanging from a tree branch 50 yards away. Broken. The casing cracked. The memory card missing. He stared at it silently. Animals didn't remove memory cards. People did. Ranger sniffed around the area. His body immediately stiffened. The dog found a scent. Ryan followed him into the woods. They tracked it nearly half a mile. Then the trail vanished among rocks and pine trees. Whoever had taken the card knew what they were doing. The realization settled heavily in Ryan's stomach. The game had changed. Someone knew about the hill. Someone knew enough to disable surveillance, and someone wanted information badly enough to take risks. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains that evening, Ryan stood on the porch watching darkness spread across the valley. The mansion sat silent behind him. The hidden facility rested beneath the hill. The broken trail camera lay on the table inside. And somewhere beyond the trees, beyond the snow, beyond the fading light, someone was still watching. The question was no longer whether the property held secrets. The question was who else wanted them, and why. Ryan Mercer spent the next 3 days searching for the answer. The broken trail camera sat on the dining room table inside the mansion. Every time he walked past it, the missing memory card felt like a message. Someone knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to take risks. Enough to enter the property. Enough to destroy evidence. The realization changed how Ryan approached each day. The old Navy SEAL habits returned completely. He varied his routines, checked the tree line regularly, documented vehicle tracks, made notes about unusual sounds and movement. Years had passed since his military service, but some instincts never faded, especially when something felt wrong. Ranger noticed the change immediately. The German Shepherd remained close, closer than usual, watching, listening, protecting. On the fourth morning, Ryan returned to the underground facility. Snow drifted gently across the hillside. The hidden hatch remained concealed beneath fresh powder. Only he and Ranger knew exactly where it was. At least that was what he hoped. The steel door groaned softly as he opened it. Cold, preserved air rose from below. Together they descended into the darkness. The underground archive felt different now. Not mysterious, important. Every shelf, every map, every photograph. Someone had spent decades protecting this place, and someone else clearly wanted something hidden inside it. Ryan began working systematically, one cabinet at a time, one shelf at a time. Hours passed. Dust floated through flashlight beams. Paper rustled softly. The silence felt almost sacred. Then he found them. A row of locked metal file drawers. Unlike everything else, these cabinets carried labels: restricted, confidential, private. Ryan frowned. That was unusual. Volunteer rescue organizations didn't normally use language like that, not for ordinary records. One drawer stood slightly open. Just enough. He pulled. The cabinet slid outward. Inside sat dozens of thick folders. The first contained rescue reports. The second contained communications logs. The third changed everything. Ryan opened it carefully. Inside were photographs. Not rescue photographs. Land surveys. Property records. Aerial images. Construction documents. Maps marked with handwritten notes. The deeper he read, the more confused he became. None of it appeared connected to rescue work, at least not directly. Ranger suddenly stopped moving. The German Shepherd stood motionless beside another cabinet. His ears rose. His head tilted slightly. Listening. Ryan froze. The room became silent. Completely silent. For several moments, neither moved. Nothing followed. Eventually, Ranger relaxed. But Ryan made another mental note. Always trust the dog. He continued reading. The next folder contained correspondence, letters, legal documents, government reports. Some dated back more than 40 years. Then he noticed a name. Hale. Ryan sat upright immediately. The same name appeared again. And again. And again. The Hale family. Preston Hale. His company. his relatives, his predecessors, everywhere. Ryan opened another folder, then another. A pattern slowly emerged. Decades earlier, the Hale family had controlled large sections of western Montana development. Mining, timber, land acquisition, infrastructure contracts. The paperwork revealed something troubling. Several emergency disaster projects appeared connected to suspicious property transfers, flood zones, fire recovery areas, emergency redevelopment programs. Land ownership shifted repeatedly after disasters, often benefiting the same small group of investors, often connected to the same family. The Hale family. Ryan's expression darkened. The files weren't making accusations. They were documenting facts, dates, contracts, transfers, signatures, evidence. Samuel Bennett had collected everything, carefully, methodically, over decades. The realization hit Ryan slowly. Summit Watch hadn't simply been saving lives. Samuel had been paying attention, watching, documenting, recording. The rescue network gave him access to communities throughout the region. He saw things other people missed, patterns, connections, abuses, and apparently he kept records, a lot of records. Ryan opened another folder. This one contained handwritten notes, Samuel's notes, detailed, organized, professional. One sentence immediately caught his attention. If these records disappear, the truth disappears with them. Ryan stared at the page. The words felt less like notes, more like a warning. He continued reading. The evidence grew increasingly serious. Questionable contracts, manipulated land values, emergency projects benefiting private investors, communities pressured into selling property after disasters. Nothing sensational, nothing exaggerated, just documentation. Years and years of documentation. Samuel Bennett had quietly assembled a mountain of evidence, and somebody clearly knew it existed. Ranger suddenly barked, sharp, loud. The sound echoed through the underground facility. Ryan stood immediately. The dog wasn't looking at the documents. He was staring toward the ladder, toward the hatch. Every muscle in his body tightened. Ryan switched off the flashlight. Darkness swallowed the room. Both remained motionless, listening, waiting. Then he heard it. A sound. Faint. Very faint. Above ground. A footstep. Not close, not loud, but human. Ryan's pulse accelerated. The sound lasted only a second, then vanished. Silence returned. The kind of silence that felt wrong. He waited. 1 minute. 2. 5. Nothing else happened. Eventually, he switched the flashlight back on. Ranger remained tense, watching the ladder, watching the darkness above. Ryan closed the file carefully. The document suddenly felt far more valuable than before, and far more dangerous. When they finally climbed back to the surface, evening shadows had begun stretching across the valley. The mountains glowed orange beneath the setting sun. Everything looked peaceful, beautiful, normal. Yet Ryan knew better. Someone had been nearby. Maybe only briefly. Maybe by accident. Maybe not. The timing felt suspicious. Back inside the mansion, he spread the documents across a large table. The evidence filled nearly half the room. Photographs, maps, contracts, letters, reports, decades of history. Ranger lay nearby, watching the front door, watching the windows, watching everything. Ryan continued reading late into the night. The final folder sat at the bottom of the cabinet, thicker than the others, older, more worn. The cover carried no label, Only a handwritten note. For whoever finds this. Ryan slowly opened it. The first page contained Samuel Bennett's handwriting. Neat, steady, direct. If you're reading this, then someone finally found what Claire and I tried to protect. Ryan read every word carefully. Samuel described Summit Watch's rescue work, its growth, its mission, its people. Then the tone changed. The final pages became urgent, concerned, almost desperate. Samuel believed certain powerful individuals had begun using disaster recovery programs to secretly acquire valuable land throughout the region. The evidence pointed repeatedly toward the same network of businessmen and investors, many connected to one family, the Hale family. Ryan turned another page, then another. The final section contained names, dozens of names. Lawyers, developers, executives, government officials, investors, connections spanning decades. At the center sat one name, Hale, again and again and again. Ryan slowly leaned back. The truth finally began taking shape. Preston Hale hadn't driven into the valley because he wanted an abandoned mansion. He didn't care about the mansion. He didn't care about the airplanes. He didn't care about the vehicles. He cared about these files. The documents, the evidence, the history Samuel Bennett had hidden beneath the hill. The realization landed heavily. The archive wasn't valuable because of money. It was valuable because of what it could expose. Outside, wind struck the mansion. Loose shutters rattled. Snow drifted against old stone walls. Inside, Ranger suddenly lifted his head. The German shepherd stared toward the darkness beyond the windows. Listening. Alert. Ready. Ryan looked down at the open folder, then toward the hill, then toward the black mountains surrounding the valley. For the first time, he understood the scale of what he had uncovered. This wasn't merely a forgotten rescue network. It wasn't merely a local mystery. It was a buried truth. One powerful enough that people were still trying to erase it 40 years later. And now that truth belonged to him, whether he wanted it or not. Ryan Mercer didn't sleep much that night. The files remained spread across the dining room table. Samuel Bennett's records. Decades of evidence. Decades of secrets. The old mansion seemed quieter than usual. Too quiet. Outside, snow continued falling across the valley. Wind drifted through the pine trees. The mountains disappeared behind a curtain of white. Ranger lay near the front door. At least he appeared to be resting. Every few minutes, one ear twitched. Every few minutes, his head lifted slightly. Listening. Always listening. Ryan sat in a worn wooden chair staring at the documents. The realization kept returning. Samuel Bennett hadn't vanished because of bad luck. Not entirely. He had discovered something. Something important enough to hide. Something important enough that people were still searching for it 40 years later. The clock on the wall read nearly midnight when the storm finally weakened. Snow continued falling, but the wind had mostly died. The sudden silence woke Ryan from a light sleep. Not completely, just enough. Years of military service had trained him to notice changes, and the disappearance of noise was sometimes more important than noise itself. His eyes opened. The mansion sat in darkness. The fire had burned low. Moonlight reflected through broken windows. Then Ranger stood, instantly, without hesitation. Every muscle tightened. The German shepherd stared toward the rear of the property. A low growl escaped his throat. Ryan sat upright. His pulse immediately accelerated. What is it? Ranger never looked away. The dog moved toward the window, focused, locked on something outside. Ryan crossed the room quietly. The valley stretched before him beneath fresh snow. At first he saw nothing. Then movement. A shadow. Human. Crossing between the barn and the machine shed. The figure moved carefully, deliberately, trying not to be seen. Ryan felt every instinct activate. The years disappeared. The mansion disappeared. Only observation remained. The shadow wasn't wandering. It wasn't lost. It was heading somewhere specific. Toward the hill. Toward the hatch. Ryan's jaw tightened. Someone new. Not suspected. New. He moved immediately. Heavy coat, flashlight, radio, boots, old habits returning automatically. Ranger was already waiting at the door. The German shepherd didn't need instructions. He understood. Together, they stepped into the storm. Snow crunched beneath their feet. The cold hit immediately. Visibility remained limited. Moonlight reflected across the valley. The shadow continued moving uphill. Then another figure appeared. Ryan froze. A second person emerged from the tree line. Not alone. The realization hit instantly. A third followed. 3 people. Working together. Coordinated. Not professionals, but organized. The old seal inside Ryan recognized the difference. This wasn't random trespassing. This was a planned search. The men moved directly toward the hidden hatch. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Exactly where the entrance was located, Ryan's stomach tightened. How? How had they found it? The answer didn't matter right now. The threat did. He motioned for Ranger to stay low. The dog obeyed immediately. Together they moved behind a cluster of rocks overlooking the hillside. The intruders reached the location. One swept a flashlight across the snow. Another began probing the ground. Searching. Looking for the hatch. Ryan considered his options. 3 against 1. Darkness. Limited visibility. Unknown intentions. His priority wasn't confrontation. It was protecting the archive. Protecting the truth. The men continued searching. One suddenly stopped. The flashlight beam lingered on disturbed soil. The exact location where Ryan had opened the hatch. His heart sank. They had found it. The lead intruder stepped forward. Only a few feet remained between him and the hidden entrance. Then Ranger made a decision. Before Ryan could react, before anyone could stop him, the German shepherd exploded from cover, a blur of black and tan against the snow. A bark shattered the silence. Loud, powerful, startling. The intruders jumped in surprise. One stumbled backward, another spun around. Flashlight beams danced wildly across the hillside. Ranger charged directly between them and the hatch, standing his ground, protecting it, protecting Ryan, protecting the secret he had uncovered. "Hey!" one of the men shouted. Chaos erupted instantly. Snow sprayed beneath boots. Voices echoed through the darkness. The intruders backed away, confused, startled, not expecting resistance. Ryan moved forward, trying to identify faces, trying to understand who they were. The flashlight beam caught one briefly. Ski mask, dark clothing, no identifying features. Then everything happened very fast. One intruder stumbled, another turned. A sharp crack echoed across the valley. The sound bounced off the mountains. Then silence. The terrible kind. The kind that freezes time. Ryan's blood turned cold, because he recognized the sound immediately. Not from television, not from movies, from experience. A gunshot. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then came the sound Ryan feared most. A yelp. Pain. Ranger. The German shepherd collapsed into the snow. Ryan's world narrowed instantly. Nothing else mattered. The intruders fled. boots pounding through snow, vanishing into darkness. Gone. Ryan didn't chase them, didn't think about chasing them, didn't care. Only Ranger mattered. He reached the dog in seconds, dropping to his knees. The German shepherd struggled to rise. Pain flashed in his eyes. Blood stained the snow near his shoulder. Not massive bleeding, but enough, far too much. No. Ryan's voice cracked. No, no, no. His hands moved automatically. Training taking over. Assessment, pressure, stabilization, focus. The wound appeared to have passed through soft tissue near the shoulder. Serious, painful, but survivable, if treated quickly. Ranger tried standing again. Ryan gently pushed him down. Easy, partner. The dog looked directly at him. Trust, complete trust. The sight nearly broke him. Ryan had treated wounded teammates before, years ago. Different wars, different mountains, different nights. But somehow this felt worse, much worse, because Ranger wasn't just a dog, not anymore. He was family, the last family Ryan had. Snow continued falling around them. The valley disappeared, the mansion disappeared. Only Ranger remained. Ryan carefully lifted the German shepherd into his arms. The dog weighed nearly 90 pounds. The old soldier didn't care. He carried him anyway. Step by step, across the snow, back toward the mansion. The journey felt endless. Every stumble increased his fear. Every breath felt too slow. Inside the mansion, Ryan transformed the kitchen into an emergency treatment area. Flashlights, bandages, medical supplies. Everything came out. Years of combat medicine resurfaced. Pressure dressings, wound cleaning, monitoring, focus, stay focused. The bleeding eventually slowed, then stopped. Hours passed. Ranger lay beside the fireplace beneath blankets, exhausted, alive. Ryan remained beside him, watching every breath, listening to every movement. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the storm finally ended. Dawn slowly approached. The first sunlight painted the valley gold. Neither Ryan nor Ranger had slept. Eventually, Ryan stepped outside. The hillside remained covered with evidence. Footprints, disturbed snow, signs of the struggle, and something else, something partially buried, near the edge of the scene. Ryan crouched, brushed away fresh snow. A small metal object emerged. A key, attached to a weathered identification tag. His pulse quickened. The tag carried faded lettering. Archive Locker 12. Ryan stared at it. For several seconds, he simply stared. The words sounded familiar. Very familiar. Then he remembered. One of Samuel Bennett's notes. A reference hidden among dozens of pages. Archive Locker 12. The phrase appeared more than once. At the time, it meant nothing. Now it meant everything. Ryan slipped the key into his pocket. Slowly, he looked toward the hill, toward the hidden hatch, toward the underground archive. Whatever the intruders had been searching for, they hadn't found it, but they had come dangerously close, and Ranger had paid the price for stopping them. The realization settled heavily inside him. This was no longer curiosity, no longer investigation, no longer a mystery. It had become personal, very personal, and somewhere beyond the mountains, beyond the snow-covered forests, beyond the darkness that still clung to the valley. The people behind the attack were probably already planning their next move. They still wanted something, something hidden, something important, something connected to Archive Locker 12. And now Ryan intended to find out exactly what it was. The valley felt different after Ranger was wounded. Quieter, heavier, as though the mountains themselves had witnessed what happened on the hillside. Snow still covered the property. The airplanes stood motionless beneath white blankets. The abandoned vehicles looked like frozen ghosts scattered across the estate. Nothing appeared different, yet everything had changed. For 3 days, Ryan barely left the mansion. Ranger needed him. That was all that mattered. The German shepherd spent most of his time resting near the fireplace. His shoulder remained bandaged. Pain medication helped, but movement was difficult. Each time he tried standing too quickly, Ryan was there. Each time he shifted uncomfortably during the night, Ryan woke immediately. The old soldier slept beside him on the floor, not because he needed to, because he wanted to, because fear had settled somewhere deep inside him, a fear he hadn't felt in years, the fear of losing someone he loved. The realization surprised him. Ranger had started as a military working dog, then a partner, then a companion. Somewhere along the way, he had become family, the last family Ryan had left. Late one evening, Ranger lifted his head from the blanket and rested it against Ryan's leg. The simple gesture nearly broke him. For a moment, another memory surfaced. A hospital room, white walls, machines, the sound of oxygen flowing through plastic tubing, his mother's final weeks, the helplessness, the waiting, the inability to fix what was broken. Ryan closed his eyes. The memory hit harder than expected. PTSD had always worked that way, not through constant pain, through unexpected moments, unexpected reminders, the mind opening doors without permission. That night, the nightmares returned, more vivid than before. Dust, rotor blades, radio traffic, men calling for help, the smell of fuel, the weight of responsibility. Ryan woke gasping, his hands clenched into fists, his breathing rapid. For a few terrifying seconds, he wasn't in Montana. He wasn't inside the mansion. He was somewhere else, somewhere he never wanted to revisit. Then a familiar nose pressed gently against his hand. Ranger. The German shepherd was awake, watching him, grounding him, pulling him back to reality, exactly as he had done dozens of times before. Ryan looked down. The dog was injured, exhausted, recovering, yet somehow still focused on helping him. The sight brought unexpected tears to his eyes. He scratched behind Ranger's ears. "You're supposed to be resting, partner." The dog's tail tapped softly against the floor, the smallest movement, but enough. Outside, wind moved through the trees. Inside, silence slowly returned. The next morning, Ryan finally turned his attention back to the mystery. The key sat on the kitchen table. Archive Locker 12. The words had occupied his thoughts constantly. Whatever the intruders wanted had to be connected. The attack wasn't random. The timing wasn't random. Nothing about the situation felt random anymore. Ranger was asleep when Ryan left. The old soldier hesitated briefly at the door, then looked back. "I'll be right back." One ear twitched. The dog understood. As always. The hike to the hillside felt strangely lonely without Ranger leading the way. Snow crunched beneath Ryan's boots. The hidden hatch waited beneath its covering of white, exactly where they had left it. He opened it carefully. The familiar rush of preserved air greeted him. Moments later, he descended into the underground archive. The facility felt even more isolated now. The silence seemed deeper, more profound. Ryan moved directly toward the storage lockers. 12 steel compartments lined the rear wall. Each carried a number. Most remained locked, untouched, forgotten. Locker 12 sat near the end, partially hidden behind shelves. The key slid into place perfectly. The click echoed through the room. Ryan paused. For a brief moment, he simply stared, then opened the door. Inside rested a single weatherproof case, black, dust-covered, carefully preserved, nothing else. No gold, no cash, no valuables, just one case. His pulse quickened. Slowly he lifted it onto a nearby table. The latches released with a metallic snap. Inside sat journals, photographs, maps, letters, government correspondence, and one thick folder labeled Final Testimony. Ryan immediately understood. This wasn't storage, it was insurance. Samuel Bennett had hidden something important enough to separate from the rest of the archive, something important enough to protect even if everything else was discovered. Ryan opened the first journal. The handwriting belonged to Samuel. Personal, unfiltered, human. Unlike the formal records throughout the facility, the entries began years earlier. Weather observations, rescue notes, personal reflections. Gradually, a larger picture emerged. Samuel and Claire Bennett hadn't simply created Summit Watch. They had built one of the most successful volunteer rescue networks in the western United States. Pilots, firefighters, search teams, ranchers, doctors, meteorologists, volunteers from multiple states, an entire organization dedicated to helping people in remote wilderness areas. The stories filled page after page. Lost hikers rescued during blizzards, medical deliveries to isolated communities, flood evacuations, mountain searches, lives saved, hundreds of lives, maybe more. Ryan continued reading. Hours disappeared. The deeper he went, the more admiration he felt. Samuel wasn't chasing fame. He wasn't chasing money. He simply believed helping people mattered. Then the journals changed. The tone shifted. The entries became shorter, more urgent, more concerned. References to land acquisitions appeared. Political pressure. Questionable development projects. Repeated mentions of the Hale family. Repeated warnings. Repeated notes about evidence being collected. Ryan's pulse quickened. The story he had pieced together from the files was correct. Samuel had discovered something serious. Then Ryan reached the final journal, the final pages. Everything slowed. The handwriting became less steady. The entries more personal. December 18th. Storm conditions worsening. December 19th. Emergency call received from Granite Ridge. December 20th. Preparing aircraft. Launching at first light. Ryan turned the page, then stopped. The final entry filled only half the paper. December 21st. Claire says the mountain won't let me come back this time. I told her she's wrong. I hope I am. The words hit Ryan harder than expected, because he understood them. Every soldier understood them. Every rescuer. Every firefighter. Every first responder. The quiet acceptance that sometimes accompanied dangerous missions. The page after that contained coordinates, nothing else. No explanation, no follow-up, no conclusion. The remaining pages were blank. Samuel Bennett had never returned. Ryan stared at the final entry for a long time. The silence inside the archive felt enormous. The answer had been here all along. Samuel hadn't simply disappeared. He had gone on one last mission and never came home. The realization settled heavily in Ryan's chest. Then he opened the folder labeled Final Testimony. Everything changed. Inside rested hundreds of pages, organized, indexed, documented. Evidence, decades of evidence. Samuel had compiled everything, every suspicious contract, every questionable transfer, every connection between disaster recovery projects and private land acquisitions, the entire history, carefully assembled, carefully protected. The final pages included signed statements, supporting documentation, recommendations for federal review, and one handwritten note. If this reaches the public, they cannot bury the truth. Ryan leaned back slowly. Now he understood. The files weren't valuable because of money. They were valuable because they preserved history, not just corruption. History. The true history of Summit Watch. The true history of Samuel and Claire Bennett. The true story of what they built, and the true story of what powerful people tried to erase. For a moment, Ryan looked around the underground facility. The maps, the photographs, the journals, the records. Everything suddenly felt different. The hidden archive wasn't a treasure vault. It was a monument to service, to sacrifice, to people who spent their lives helping strangers. The realization brought unexpected emotion. He thought about Ranger, the hillside, the digging, the persistence, the injury. Without that dog, none of this would have been found. None of it. Ryan carefully closed the journal, then looked toward the ceiling above, toward the snowy hillside, toward the valley, toward the mansion, toward the wounded German shepherd waiting beside the fireplace. For the first time since the attack, anger began transforming into something else, purpose, because the mystery was no longer about discovering what happened. Now it was about protecting it, protecting Samuel's story, protecting Claire's legacy, protecting the truth. Ranger nearly died defending, and Ryan Mercer had already decided. He wasn't walking away. The decision settled inside him like stone, solid, unmoving, permanent. When Ryan climbed out of the underground archive that evening, the world looked different. Not because the mountains had changed, not because the mansion had changed, because he had changed. The mystery was gone, at least most of it. Now there was a responsibility, a duty, something every SEAL understood. When the truth lands in your hands, what you do next matters. Snow drifted across the hillside. The hidden hatch disappeared beneath fresh powder once again. Ranger greeted him halfway across the valley. The German shepherd was moving better. Not fast, not comfortably, but better. The bandage remained wrapped around his shoulder. The limp remained visible, yet his eyes carried the same determination they always had. Ryan knelt beside him. "You're supposed to be resting." Ranger pushed his nose against Ryan's hand. The old soldier smiled. Some arguments were impossible to win. That night, Ryan spread Samuel Bennett's journals across the dining room table. The mansion sat quiet around him. Firelight flickered against stone walls. Wind rattled distant windows. Outside, darkness swallowed the valley. Inside, history waited. Ryan opened the final journals again. This time he wasn't looking for evidence. He was looking for Samuel, the man behind the legend, the man behind the rescue network, the man behind the mystery. Hours passed. Page after page revealed pieces of a life, not the public version, the private one, the real one. Samuel's entries described weather patterns, aircraft maintenance, rescue operations, but increasingly another name appeared. Claire Bennett, his wife, his partner, his equal. Ryan began noticing something. Every major rescue involved both of them. Samuel flew the aircraft. Claire predicted weather. Samuel coordinated pilots. Claire managed communications. Samuel appeared in newspaper photographs. Claire stayed behind the scenes. Yet without Claire, none of it would have worked. The realization grew stronger with every journal. Summit Watch wasn't Samuel's creation. It was theirs. Together. One entry made Ryan stop reading. February 8th. Avalanche warning ignored by county officials. Claire insisted we alert everyone ourselves. She was right. Again. 37 people reached safety before the slide hit. Ryan smiled. The affection practically glowed from the page. Another entry. September 14th. Lost hiker located after 3 days. Claire refused to stop searching. I told her we needed rest. She told me rest could wait. She was right. Again. The pattern continued. Again, and again, and again. The journals weren't just documenting missions. They were documenting a marriage, a partnership built on service, trust, sacrifice, shared purpose. Ryan found himself unexpectedly invested. He wanted to know what happened. Not the mystery, not the conspiracy. Them. The final years appeared in several thick journals stored near the bottom of the case. The handwriting changed gradually. More urgent. More concerned. References to land acquisitions increased. Mentions of the Hale family became frequent. Samuel's notes grew sharper. More direct. He clearly believed he had uncovered something significant. Then Ryan found a journal entry that changed everything. August 3rd. Met with federal investigators. Provided copies of documentation. They agree the pattern exists. Need more evidence before moving forward. Claire says we're making powerful enemies. She's probably right. Ryan leaned forward. This wasn't suspicion. It wasn't theory. Samuel had already begun reporting what he discovered. The investigation had become real. The next entries grew increasingly troubling. Vehicles following them. Unexpected visitors. Missing documents. Pressure from investors. Warnings from anonymous sources. Then one passage stood out. If anything happens to me, Claire knows what to do. The archive remains hidden. The truth remains protected. Ryan stared at the sentence. The answer suddenly became obvious. Claire hadn't disappeared after Samuel vanished. She had gone underground. Metaphorically. She had hidden the archive. Preserved the evidence. Protected Summit Watch's history. Then quietly vanished from public life. Not out of fear. Out of purpose. The realization brought unexpected respect. For 40 years, she had succeeded, until Ranger found the hatch. Near midnight, Ryan finally reached the final journal. The last mission. The last pages. The last days of Samuel Bennett's life. Outside, wind swept across the valley. Inside, the fire crackled softly. Ryan turned the page. December 18th. Emergency beacon detected near Granite Peak. Weather conditions unstable. Aircraft likely down. Possible survivors. December 19th. Search delayed by storm conditions. Visibility poor. Claire wants additional support before launch. December 20th. No support available. Roads closed. Weather worsening. People still missing. Ryan swallowed. He already knew where this was going. Every rescue worker knew. Every veteran knew. The moment duty collides with danger. The moment someone chooses to go anyway. The final entry appeared on the next page. December 21st. Claire says the mountain won't let me come back this time. I told her she's wrong. I hope I am. Below the words sat a set of coordinates. Nothing else, no farewell, no dramatic goodbye, no final speech, just coordinates and silence. The remaining pages were blank. Ryan stared at them for a long time. The simplicity made it worse. Samuel had fully expected to return. That was the tragedy. He wasn't chasing glory. He wasn't seeking recognition. Someone needed help. So he went. The same decision rescuers make every day. The same decision soldiers make. The same decision firefighters make. Service first, everything else second. Ryan leaned back. The room suddenly felt very quiet. His eyes drifted toward Ranger. The German shepherd slept beside the fireplace, breathing steadily, alive. The sight grounded him. For a moment he imagined Samuel and Claire sitting in this same mansion decades earlier, preparing maps, planning missions, answering emergency calls, building something larger than themselves, then losing everything. One mission, one storm, one disappearance. Yet somehow their work survived, not because of luck, because Claire refused to let it disappear. Ryan opened the final folder from the weatherproof case, the one labeled Final Testimony. Several official documents rested inside. Letters, recommendations, endorsements, government correspondence. Then he found the last item, a formal recommendation for national recognition, prepared by emergency management officials, supported by multiple states, signed by dozens of agencies. The document praised Summit Watch, its rescue record, its contributions, its impact. The recommendation would have brought national attention, recognition, legacy, everything Samuel and Claire deserved. The final page stopped Ryan cold. Status, pending submission. Date, December 22nd. The day after Samuel disappeared. The recommendation had never been filed, never completed, never submitted. Everything stopped the moment Samuel vanished. History simply moved on. The world forgot. Ryan slowly closed the folder. The truth finally felt complete. The real treasure had never been buried beneath the hill. The archive wasn't treasure. The evidence wasn't treasure. Even the corruption files weren't treasure. The real treasure was a forgotten American legacy, a husband and wife who spent decades saving lives, a rescue network that changed thousands of futures, a story nearly erased from history. And somehow, through pure persistence, Ranger had uncovered all of it. Outside, snow drifted across the valley. The mountains stood silent beneath moonlight. Inside the mansion, Ryan looked at the sleeping German shepherd. The old dog had found more than a bunker, more than evidence, more than answers. He had found a legacy powerful enough that people were still trying to destroy it. And now Ryan understood exactly why. Because if the truth became public, everything changed. The mansion would never be demolished. The valley would never be developed. The history would become protected. Samuel and Claire Bennett would finally receive the recognition they earned, and people like Preston Hale would lose the opportunity to bury the past forever. Ryan stood and walked toward the window. The hill waited in darkness beyond the snow. The hidden archive rested safely beneath it, for now. But not for much longer, because sooner or later, the truth would have to leave the hill. And when it did, a fight was coming. A public fight. A legal fight. A fight over history itself. Ryan stared out across the sleeping valley, then quietly made himself a promise. Samuel Bennett's final mission had ended in silence. His legacy would not. The first legal notice arrived 4 days later. Ryan found it folded inside his mailbox near the front gate. A certified envelope. Professional. Expensive. The kind of paperwork designed to intimidate before anyone even opened it. Ranger walked beside him as he carried it back toward the mansion. The German shepherd's limp had improved significantly. The wound still slowed him down, but each day he grew stronger. Each day he spent less time resting beside the fireplace and more time following Ryan through the property. Neither seemed willing to let the other out of sight for long. Inside the mansion, Ryan opened the envelope. Property ownership dispute. He wasn't surprised. The second notice arrived 2 days later. The third arrived the following week, then another, and another. Inheritance claims, land challenges, environmental reviews, historical ownership disputes. The language changed. The goal remained the same. Pressure, delay, intimidation. Someone wanted him exhausted. Someone wanted him overwhelmed. Someone wanted him gone. Ryan simply stacked the paperwork beside Samuel's journals. The old seal had dealt with worse. Much worse. The phone rang late one afternoon. The caller ID displayed a local number. Ryan answered. "Hello, Ryan?" The voice belonged to Eleanor Pierce. The librarian sounded unusually serious. "What happened?" Silence lingered briefly. Then she spoke. "The county scheduled a hearing." Ryan sat upright. "A hearing for what?" "The property." The answer immediately grabbed his attention. Eleanor continued. "Developers? Attorneys? Preservation groups? County officials?" Another pause. "And Preston Hale." Ryan looked out the window toward the mountains. The battle had finally become public. The hearing took place 10 days later. The courthouse sat in the center of Alder Creek, a modest brick building surrounded by snow-covered sidewalks. Normally quiet, normally forgettable. Not today. The parking lot overflowed. News vans lined the street. Reporters stood near the entrance. Residents crowded the sidewalks. Word had spread. Somehow the mystery of Samuel Bennett had escaped the valley. The truth was beginning to surface. Ryan arrived early. Ranger walked beside him. The German shepherd moved carefully but proudly. The scar beneath his shoulder remained hidden beneath thick fur. Only the limp remained. A reminder, a witness, a price already paid. People noticed them immediately. Several reporters turned. Cameras followed. Questions flew through the air. Ryan ignored them. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere felt electric. Every seat was occupied. County officials, ranchers, firefighters, veterans, teachers, business owners, people from across the region, all waiting, all curious. At the front sat Preston Hale, expensive suit, perfect posture, calm expression. His attorneys surrounded him. Stacks of paperwork covered their table. Ryan noticed something immediately. Not one of them looked interested in the mansion. Not one looked interested in the airplanes. Not one seemed interested in Summit Watch. Only the property. Only ownership. Only control. The hearing began shortly after 9. Hours passed. Lawyers presented arguments. Property experts testified. Inheritance claims appeared. Environmental studies followed. The process felt endless, technical, complicated, deliberately confusing. Again and again, the conversation focused on money, land value, development opportunities, ownership rights, future profits. Ryan listened quietly. Ranger remained beside his chair, watching, waiting. Then something unexpected happened. An elderly woman stood, slowly, carefully, supported by a cane. The room fell silent. "My name is Ellen Whitaker." Her voice trembled slightly, yet somehow every word carried. The attorneys stopped talking. The reporters lowered their pens. The woman looked toward the commissioners. "When I was 9 years old, my family became trapped in a blizzard." Silence filled the room. My father broke his leg. She swallowed. My younger brother was 6. Her eyes glistened. We would have died. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then she smiled softly. Samuel Bennett found us. The room remained completely still. Ellen returned to her seat. Another person stood. Then another. Then another. A retired firefighter. A former sheriff. An elderly rancher. A woman carrying faded photographs. One after another they came forward. One after another they told stories. A rescue during a flood. A medical flight through a snowstorm. Emergency supplies delivered during a wildfire. Search teams coordinated during blizzards. Lives saved. Families reunited. Children rescued. Again, and again, and again. For nearly 2 hours, something remarkable happened. The hearing stopped being about land. It became about memory. The room transformed, not through arguments, through people, real people, living proof. A man in his 70s held up a newspaper clipping. Samuel flew medicine to our town when roads were closed. A woman displayed a faded photograph. Claire Bennett organized the volunteers who found my husband. Another spoke quietly. My father was one of their pilots. The stories continued, each one adding another piece, each one revealing another life touched by Summit Watch. Ryan watched the commissioners carefully. Their expressions changed. The reporters' expressions changed. Even Preston Hale's attorneys stopped writing, because the narrative was shifting. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Finally, Ryan stood. The room grew silent again. He carried only one item. Samuel's final journal. No prepared speech. No rehearsed statement. Just the truth. Ryan opened the journal carefully. The pages felt fragile. Historic. Human. He found the final entry. The last words Samuel Bennett ever wrote. Then looked up. The entire courtroom watched. He wasn't searching for recognition. Ryan's voice remained calm, steady. He wasn't searching for wealth. The room remained silent. He was trying to save someone. Several people lowered their eyes. Ryan continued. He flew into a mountain storm because somebody needed help. The words lingered, powerful in their simplicity. Then Ryan held up the unfinished federal recommendation. The document Samuel never lived to see completed. This was supposed to honor Samuel and Claire Bennett. He looked toward the commissioners. It was never submitted. His eyes moved across the room. It sat hidden for 40 years. Silence. Then he spoke the words that mattered most. This property doesn't belong to a corporation. He looked briefly toward Preston Hale. It doesn't belong to developers. Another pause. It belongs to history. The room erupted in applause. Not everyone. But enough. Enough to matter. Enough to change everything. Then Ranger stood. Slowly. Carefully. The German shepherd limped forward beside Ryan. The movement drew every eye. The courtroom quieted once more. People noticed the scar. People noticed the limp. People noticed the loyalty. Nothing dramatic happened. No commands. No tricks. The dog simply stood beside the man he loved, a living reminder of the price already paid to protect the truth. Several people wiped tears from their eyes. Others smiled. The moment carried more power than any speech, because everyone understood. Loyalty, sacrifice, devotion. The same values that built Summit Watch. The same values that uncovered its story. The hearing ended shortly before sunset. Outside, snow reflected the orange glow of evening. The mountains stood silent beyond town. People gathered in small groups, talking, remembering, waiting. The commissioners disappeared into a private room. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour. Nobody left. Not the reporters, not the townspeople, not even Preston Hale. Everyone understood. The decision would determine everything. The mansion, the archive, the valley. Samuel's legacy. The future. Finally, the doors opened. The commissioners returned. The lead commissioner carried a document. The room became completely silent. Ryan felt Ranger lean gently against his leg. The old soldier rested one hand on the dog's head. Waiting. The commissioner adjusted his glasses, then began reading. Every word felt slower than the last. Every sentence stretched the tension. The room held its breath. Outside, darkness settled across Alder Creek. Inside, history waited for judgment. And for the first time in 40 years, the truth finally had a chance to win. The commissioner adjusted his glasses. The document trembled slightly in his hands. Not from uncertainty, from significance. Everyone in the courtroom understood that whatever came next would determine the future of the valley, the future of the mansion, the future of Samuel and Claire Bennett's legacy. The room remained silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the reporters seemed frozen, waiting. The commissioner cleared his throat, then began reading. After reviewing the testimony presented, his voice echoed softly through the courthouse. After examining historical records, rescue documentation, witness statements, preservation reports, and supporting evidence, Preston Hale's expression remained calm, but Ryan noticed the tension around his eyes. The attorneys beside him exchanged brief glances. The commissioner continued. The county recognizes the Bennett Estate and Summit Watch Archive as a site of exceptional historical significance. A murmur spread through the room. The commissioner raised one hand. Silence returned immediately. The property shall receive permanent protection under state historical preservation guidelines. Several people gasped. Others covered their mouths. The commissioner lowered his eyes to the final paragraph, then delivered the words everyone would remember. All pending development applications connected to the property are denied. For one heartbeat, the room remained silent. Then everything exploded. Applause, cheers, tears. People rose from their seats. Reporters rushed toward the exits. Phones appeared everywhere. The story was already spreading. The truth had won. After 40 years, the truth had finally won. Ryan remained standing, almost unable to move, almost unable to process what had happened. Beside him, Ranger slowly sat down. The German shepherd leaned gently against his leg. The simple contact brought Ryan back to the moment, back to reality, back to the valley, back to the dog who had started everything. Across the room, Eleanor Pierce wiped tears from her eyes. Former firefighters embraced. Old ranchers shook hands. Several of the people rescued by Summit Watch decades earlier stood together, smiling through tears. Samuel Bennett's legacy no longer belonged to forgotten boxes beneath a hill. Now it belonged to everyone. Preston Hale left without speaking. His attorneys followed. No interviews, no statements, no arguments. Just silence. The same silence Samuel Bennett had lived under for 40 years. Only now the silence belonged to different people. Outside, evening sunlight painted Alder Creek gold. Snow reflected orange and pink beneath the fading sky. Ryan stepped onto the courthouse steps. The cold mountain air filled his lungs. For a moment, he simply stood there, looking toward the distant peaks, thinking about the journey. Months earlier, he had been sleeping behind a truck stop, a homeless veteran with nothing but an aging pickup and an old German shepherd. Now everything felt different. Not because he had gained wealth, not because he had gained property, because he had found purpose. The one thing he thought was gone forever. A reporter approached. "Mr. Mercer, how do you feel?" Ryan looked down at Ranger. The dog stared back calmly, watching, waiting. As always. Ryan smiled slightly. "I think Samuel and Claire finally got their story back." The next 3 years changed the valley. Spring arrived, then summer, then autumn, then winter again. The mansion slowly transformed, not into something modern, not into something polished, into something alive. Preservation specialists restored damaged sections carefully. Historians cataloged every document. Researchers traveled from across the country to study the Summit Watch archives. The 2 aircraft remained exactly where Samuel had left them, protected, preserved, honored. The 11 abandoned vehicles received plaques explaining their role in rescue operations. Visitors came from multiple states. Some arrived because they loved history. Others arrived because Summit Watch had once saved someone in their family. The stories continued growing. More records surfaced. More witnesses came forward. More lives connected to the legacy. Within 2 years, a nonprofit organization partnered with the estate. Their proposal felt almost inevitable: a mountain rescue training center, built around the principles Samuel and Claire had lived by. Service, preparedness, sacrifice, community. Ryan accepted immediately. Former military personnel volunteered as instructors. Retired pilots offered aviation training. Search and rescue professionals donated equipment. Young men and women arrived eager to learn, eager to serve. Exactly the kind of future Samuel Bennett would have wanted. Ryan eventually moved permanently into a restored section of the mansion, not because it felt luxurious, because it felt meaningful. The nightmares still came occasionally. PTSD didn't vanish. Trauma rarely did. But now those dark moments no longer defined him. Each morning he woke with a mission, a reason to move forward, a purpose larger than himself. And every morning Ranger remained beside him. Older, slower, a little grayer around the muzzle, but still watching, still loyal, still determined. 3 years after the hearing, a school bus arrived on a bright autumn afternoon. Children spilled onto the grounds, laughing, talking, pointing excitedly toward the airplanes. A volunteer guide led them through the property, explaining the history, explaining Summit Watch, explaining Samuel and Claire Bennett. Ryan sat on the front porch. Ranger rested beside him. The dog was showing his age now, his movements slower, his naps longer, but his eyes remained sharp. One young girl eventually wandered away from the tour group. She couldn't have been older than 10. Curious eyes, dark jacket, bright smile. She approached the porch carefully. Ryan looked up. "Hello." The girl pointed toward the mansion. "My teacher said you discovered everything." Ryan smiled. "I helped." The girl looked confused. "Then who really found it?" Ryan glanced toward Ranger. The German shepherd lifted his head slightly. One ear twitched. The same way it always had. The same way it did on that first night in the mansion. The same way it did when he stared toward the hill. The same way it did before everything changed. Ryan's smile softened. He did. The little girl looked at the dog, then back at Ryan, then at the dog again. For a moment she seemed unsure whether he was joking. Then Ranger's tail thumped softly against the porch. The girl laughed, a bright, honest laugh. She walked over carefully and scratched behind his ears. Ranger accepted the attention with quiet dignity, as if he had no idea what all the fuss was about. The girl eventually rejoined her class. The tour continued. The voices faded into the distance. Ryan remained on the porch, watching, thinking, remembering. The mountains stretched across the horizon beneath golden afternoon light. The airplanes stood silently in the field. The restored mansion looked stronger than ever. The rescue center buzzed with activity. People learning, people helping, people carrying forward the mission. The valley no longer felt abandoned. It felt alive. Ranger slowly rested his head against Ryan's boot, exactly as he had done hundreds of times before. Ryan scratched behind the dog's ears. The old German shepherd closed his eyes contentedly. For a long moment, neither moved. Neither needed to. The silence felt peaceful now. Not lonely. Not empty, peaceful. Ryan thought about the truth he had learned. The abandoned mansion had never been the treasure. The hidden bunker had never been the treasure. Even the evidence wasn't the treasure. The real treasure was loyalty. The kind that refuses to quit. The kind that keeps searching. The kind that stands guard when everyone else walks away. Samuel and Claire Bennett had lived that way. Ranger had lived that way. And because of that loyalty, an entire chapter of American history survived. The sun slowly slipped behind the mountains. Golden light faded across the valley. Evening settled over the estate. The training center. The museum. The rescue archive. The airplanes. The mansion. Everything existed because one stubborn German shepherd refused to stop digging. Ryan looked down at Ranger one final time. "Good job, partner." The dog's tail tapped once against the porch. Then the camera of memory seemed to pull back, higher and higher above the valley, above the mansion, above the airplanes, above the mountains, until the entire landscape stretched beneath the fading sunset. A forgotten place, a forgotten story, a forgotten legacy. Found again because one wounded veteran and one loyal dog refused to give up. And in the end, that was the greatest rescue mission of all. If you believe loyalty and perseverance still matter in this world, comment 1 below. If you've ever had a dog, friend, or family member who stood by you through hard times, comment 0 and tell us where you're watching from. Sometimes the greatest treasures aren't hidden in the ground. They're the people who never give up on us. And if you enjoy stories about justice, dignity, and ordinary Americans standing their ground, be sure to subscribe and join us for the next journey.